pleased to introduce Kris Sigford, the Water Quality Program Director from the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, that's MCEA. MCEA is a highly respected nonprofit organization celebrating 40 years of accomplishments in protecting Minnesota's water, air, land, and people. And Kris is the center's senior policy advocate with over 30 years of experience working on natural resource issues. She directs a comprehensive program aimed at improving water quality through 3 key strategies: full implementation of federal and state water quality laws, adequate funding of water quality improvements, and lastly, through innovative approaches to control agricultural sources of sediment and nutrients to freshwater systems and the Gulf of Mexico. Last year, she was awarded the National River Network's River Hero Award. Kris is passionate about clean water to drink, for fish to live in, to swim in, and paddle on. So I'd like to welcome Kris today.
Well, thanks for that nice introduction, Karen. I have been working on water quality for a long time and thought I would share with you some of the challenges and some of the things that are going well, some of the things that are not going so well with water quality, mostly in Minnesota. But to start out, this is kind of a complicated slide, but I wanted to give you a sense of the global context of water. Most of the water is, say, in this left bar chart, you can see that most of the water in the world is saline. It's in the oceans and it's in other saline environments. Only 2.5% of all the water on Earth is what's called fresh water. Of that 2.5%, go to the middle bar, you can see that most of it, almost 70%, is kind of locked up in glaciers and ice caps. About 30% is in groundwater, that water that most of us get used for drinking water that's below the surface of the earth. And only 1.2% is what's called surface water. So of that, then, going over to the bar on the right, you've got most of the surface water, almost 70%, is in ground ice and permafrost. About 21% is in lakes. And you can see up there at the top, you can see that just it's only about 0.5% is in rivers. So for what we think of as water, fresh water and water quality, it's really just about, it's like little over 21% of 1.2% of 2.5%. So it's a precious commodity. Minnesota, as you all know, is rich though in fresh water and surface waters. We have 92,000 miles of streams and rivers, and over 12,000 lakes of greater than 10 acres in size. Our water is facing some challenges. When we go out and assess and monitor our water bodies, we find that about 40% of them are what is called impaired. They're not meeting water quality standards designed to protect human health, fish, other biological communities, and recreation. The big ones, the big impairments that we suffer from are turbidity here, that's basically dirt, sediment, excessive nutrients, bacterial contamination. Now these 3 big ones derive these to our biological impairments of impoverished fish and macroinvertebrate, basically bug communities. This one here, this narrow blue stripe here, is low dissolved oxygen, which is a result of nutrient loading, and is also a stressor for the biological community. So you can see this are all the impairments in the state except for mercury. Mercury is a different kind of a critter because it's atmospheric deposition, and so we're on a different track for handling that and trying to cut the mercury emissions, but it's largely a global and regional, like continent-wide problem. So, what are the sources of these problems? Only about 14% is what are called point sources, and the rest, 86%, is from non-point sources. What are point sources? This is a picture of a point source. This is a municipal wastewater treatment plant, sewage treatment plant. This is their discharge into this river here, which is receiving treated wastewater. Some industries also have permits to discharge directly to water bodies. These are non-point, this is a non-point source. This is a classic non-point source for Minnesota. It's agriculture. Non-point sources are diffuse across the landscape, and water runs over it, picks up pollutants, and gets into our streams, rivers, and so forth. So what does it mean to be impaired? Why do we care? What are the problems? Well, if you get low oxygen, fish are going to die. This is a fish kill up on the Pelican River. This is Lake Crystal in southwestern Minnesota, experiencing a terrible algal bloom. You can see a floating crust and so forth. Obviously, you don't want to swim in that, boat on that, be a fish in that. This one is the scariest, really, picture to me. I don't know how the lighting is for you, but this water you can see is bright. There's this bright green slime. It almost looks like green paint. This is Lake Billsby on the border of Dakota and Goodhue counties. It's a highly valued recreational resource. There's a public access. This is a beach. This boy is playing in an active cyanobacterial toxic bloom. This is bad for human health. And I got a picture of him facing front to, he's got like this green slime up in his nostrils and his ears and everything else. So that's really bad news. This is an aerial photo of the bottom of Pike Island here in the Twin Cities. This is the confluence of the Mississippi River. On top, you can see, looks kind of dark blue and relatively clear. This is the Minnesota River, which looks like chocolate milk. One of our most impaired waterways and proving to be fairly intractable to change. Okay, so much of Minnesota drains to the Mississippi River system, about 60% of the state. And this is what goes on down at the bottom of the Mississippi River in the Gulf of Mexico. Annually forms this dead zone. The hypoxic zone is what it's formally called. This is huge. This is the second largest dead zone in the world. So what happens is that the oxygen gets so low that it cannot support marine life. And if you're capable of swimming away, you'll be okay. If you can't, like if you're a shrimp or somebody on the bottom, you're going to die. You can see how large this is. I mean, this is the coastline of Texas. It's all of Louisiana. This is the delta of the Mississippi River, and on over to Mississippi and Alabama. The U.S. Geological Survey has done a fair amount of highly calibrated modeling to look at the sources of nutrients to the Gulf of Mexico that are responsible for driving that dead zone. And as you can see here, these three are all agricultures. These are row crops, all other crops, and pasture and range. This sort of orangey tan one is all animal feedlots and so forth, animal production. So this is 80% of the phosphorus delivered to the Gulf from agriculture. For nitrogen, it's a similar story, although you have the row crops here, the other crops, and then a smaller slice from your urban areas, and a smaller contributions from animal agriculture. But you have a lot more. You have a slice of pie here at 16% for basically that's atmospheric deposition. Which is also agriculturally driven. When the nitrogen is applied to the land, then it volatilizes to the air, and then it's redeposited in water. This, I don't know if anybody saw this picture. It was pretty widely run a couple of years ago. This is Lake Erie, one of the Great Lakes in the midst of a toxic cyanobacterial bloom. This is the same type of algal bloom that shut down the drinking water for the city of Toledo this past July, I think it was. City of 500,000 people couldn't use its drinking water because its water source was Lake Erie, and it was having a toxic bloom. So I've often been asked, could what happened in Toledo happen here in Minnesota? The short answer is no, probably not. Not like that. We do have some drinking water challenges, but very few of us in Minnesota get our water from lakes, particularly shallow lakes, which is where this type of algae bloom really tends to flourish because it's slow moving, and the nutrients have a chance to grow algae and express themselves. 75% of us in Minnesota get our drinking water from groundwater, underground aquifers, and the other 25% of us get our drinking water supply from from rivers or riverine reservoirs. That's not to say that we don't have some challenges, though. This is, it might be a little hard to see, but these are concentrations in our major water, in the streams and rivers in Minnesota of nitrate, which is a toxin to humans, causes blue baby syndrome. This shows that here down in the southern part of the state, you can see that there are the red and orange and yellow dots, which are the surface water, rivers and streams that have excessive amounts of nitrate in them. This kind of just shows where it's coming from. This is load in terms of pounds per acre. And you can see a gradient from the north of the dark green, the low contributions, down to south central Minnesota, where you have the highest contributions. Similar to what the USGS found in modeling inputs for the whole Gulf of Mexico, for the whole Mississippi River system, we find that cropland agriculture is 73% of the loading of nitrates to our rivers. Point sources, those, the municipal sources generally are only 9%, and the other 18% is the atmospheric deposition, which is also agriculturally driven. This is our drinking water concern. That was surface waters. This is drinking water. This map shows private drinking water wells, residential wells that are in the excess of the safe drinking water standard of 10 milligrams per liter. And you can see there's a sort of a big concentration here in what's called the Central Sands area, and down here in the southeastern karst geology part of the state. MCEA, earlier this year, I did a contract with some economists at the University of Minnesota to take a look at the externalized costs of nitrogen fertilizer use in Minnesota. And what this hasn't even been published yet, but what they've come up with is an estimates of $8 million per year in costs imposed on those who own private wells. About $3.5 million on public drinking water suppliers when folks have to drill new wells or bring in water from other areas to blend so that they can meet their finished water is safe for people to drink. When you get to air, you get to some much larger numbers of about $96 million per year in greenhouse gas emissions from the manufacture of nitrogen fertilizer, and $791 million per year from the manufacture and release of nitrogen oxides and ammonia. So what is Minnesota? How are we kind of dealing with all these issues? Probably the biggest arrow in our quiver is the Clean Water Legacy funding that voters dedicated a portion of the sales tax in 2008. You can see, well, maybe you can't see, but we're up about, that's throwing off about $100 million a year, which is a nice piece of money to be able to address some of these issues. I promised to tell you kind of how that's been used. We have had that funding source for 6 years, 3 biennia, and this is how the expenditures break down. The biggest chunk here, as you might expect, goes to implementation of fixes, both for best management practices on farms or for upgrades to municipal treatment plants. You've got money to monitor our water, money to plan for to do modeling and so forth, to plan your upgrades. You got a growing slice of this pie over the 3 funding cycles, 3 biennia over 6 years, is for groundwater and drinking water protection, and I think that's in part driven by some very alarming findings that I already showed you on nitrate in drinking water. So what's going well with this money? What are we doing with it? Well, this shows very steady progress to present, and this ends in 2013. So by the end of this year, I mean, shortly, we're going to be right up here. Minnesota has really stepped up its monitoring and assessment of our water bodies, so that we know the fundamental baseline condition of what's going on. These are investments in mostly municipal sewage treatment plants or addressing unsewered communities. And you can't see them all, but they're different types, and they have an estimate of the amount of phosphorus that they've abated. This one shows more general. This one goes, you can't really see up here, it goes from 2000 to 2025, projected obviously. And this is a drop in the aggregate phosphorus loading from municipal treatment plants over year by year, and you can see some pretty tremendous progress there. The upper line, just gradually trending up, is the estimate of what would have been put out if these upgrades hadn't been done. Addressing agricultural pollution is not going quite as well. This map shows the result of comparative monitoring from the mid-70s to through 2010. And you can see, maybe you can't see them, but each of the little upward pointing red triangles is an increasing trend in nitrate in our surface waters. So you can see like 268%, and there's some really like big increases going on here. So it's getting in the water. This is another kind of a snapshot aggregator type picture. Lake Pepin is a natural impoundment on the Mississippi River south of town, down by Red Wing and Lake City and so forth. It's a very nice recreational resource. This work has been, St. Croix Watershed Station has done some core sampling to try to, and some DNA fingerprinting to try to figure out what were the, how much sediment had been going into Lake Pepin. You can see the natural background level, and then you can see a sharp increase in cultural inputs, especially escalating after World War II. And if this continues, Lake Pepin will be filled in 300 years. Should be a resource that's around for at least another 5,000 years. Some other markers are not going so well. Land that was protected in the Federal Conservation Reserve Program had easements on it. Minnesota has lost hundreds of thousands of acres in recent years. Similarly, land, the other flip side of that coin is that we've got another about 2 million acres in corn production just in the past 6 or 7 years. And corn is a very, very heavy nitrogen user. Fertilizer sales have climbed steadily over the past 50 years, if you track our receipts of that. And subsurface drainage, which is our largest source of nitrogen to surface waters, is expanding tremendously over the years, with 100 million feet or more of drain tile being laid every year. It's the largest plumbing system in the world. Together, all those practices, all those trends have offset more than $2 billion in state and federal conservation investments just for Minnesota alone over the past 20 years. I think what this leads me to is that I think that we're at the point where society has to have maybe some hard conversations about, if the voluntary only publicly subsidized cleanup of agricultural pollution isn't working, and we're just kind of we're taking one step forward and 5 steps backward, what's next? Is it time that we regulate this industry, which is the only industry that really isn't regulated by the Clean Water Act? Who should be bearing these externalized costs? Should it be the people whose well has been polluted, or which is the current situation, or should it be the folks who are applying the nitrogen fertilizer to the land? Are we willing to? I think our alternative is we can just say, yes, we make this choice. We're going to sacrifice water quality because we're unwilling to control the agricultural sources. So that's my view of kind of where we are. I focused on the big aggregate problems across the state and downriver, but local water resources can be very strongly impacted by population centers. And there are things that we urban folks can do to help keep our water clean. This is one: don't flush medications. It's bad for the fish. Sewage treatment plants are not designed to treat medications and to remove them. So they just go straight into the rivers. You can adopt your local storm drain. Whenever my husband and I have lived on a corner, we keep these things clean and sometimes travel down the block, and now we're in the middle of the block and try to keep it clean. Also, of course, don't dump anything down a drain. Obviously, picking up after your dog is a good practice. try to find products that do not contain triclosan. I think it's subject to a phase out in Minnesota because of legislation that was passed last year, but there are still products that have it. It's used in antibacterial stuff and a lot of hygiene and cosmetic products. Shout out to Bloomington. This is almost at the end. Something at a slightly larger level, community level, is Bloomington has put in some rain gardens, which are very effective at holding stormwater back, letting it percolate naturally into the ground, and filtering out pollutants. So this is one that's under construction, and this is the same one when it's done. It's just very attractive, and the water runs down the street there and goes into the drain, and then it's held in this depressional area. Which is great for river health. It holds back those real surges that can be very damaging to the stream banks and so forth. So that's what I have for you today. And I don't know if we have time, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to give them a shot at answering them. Sure.
Happened to catch 60 Minutes last night. And the topic was groundwater and the shortage of groundwater. And it started then with California and the fact that California is unrestricted in wells. And then it went around the world, and they can now photograph and calculate groundwater sources by satellite. And it was very disturbing, quite alarming, and they're suggesting that California, which is our breadbasket, is into a crash course of actually literally running out of water in the Colorado River. And then I think he even showed up in Minnesota and the Great Plains where they're sucking the ground dry through Nebraska and Dakota. That's not your topic.
No,
It's all part of the problem.
Yeah, it's interconnected, and I knew I wouldn't have time to really get into groundwater, but we do have, water-rich as Minnesota is, even we have some concerns, and if any of you have seen White Bear Lake in recent years, you know that's a very visible bellwether of overpumping groundwater. And so it's relatively localized. I mean, we have some areas in Minnesota that are overdrawn. And the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources is responsible for issuing permits for water appropriations and so forth. And they're being sued by a homeowners association of White Bear Lake residents, but they are taking a much closer look at their programs to see what the cumulative impacts might be on groundwater recharge in certain areas. But that's a whole other topic. So,
I spearhead with Neil too on that too. I watched that same thing, and some areas in California were dropping. It was literally the whole ground was dropping almost feet per year because of the ground. And what is that? And they weren't really sure what the long-term effects were, but they weren't good.
What are people doing in other parts like Tucson? Can you say anything about that?
Tucson is doing a lot in southern Arizona, is doing a lot with water conservation, and they have actually sort of water police. I spend part of the winter in Tucson, and there are a number of good programs to help homeowners do drip irrigation if they're going to do anything at all. And to really limit that, and to be very careful with use of water, reuse of water, use of gray water instead of finished drinking water for golf course watering and stuff like that. But yes.
It seems like one of the bigger problems is agricultural production of fertilizers. So what's the fertilizer industry doing to combat this, to come up with something new that might not pollute our water system?
Well, the fertilizer industry, their business is producing and selling fertilizer. So I mean, I think it's up to other sectors of society really to say, whoa, wait a sec, we need to take a closer look at this. And so the Minnesota Department of Agriculture is trying to look at better voluntary best management practices to make sure that they result in less nitrate. Nitrate is downwardly mobile. It goes down into the ground it's very mobile in water and goes straight into the groundwater, or else is intercepted by this subsurface drain tile and then piped to a stream or river. So, but not enough is being done. That's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to folks like you and see if it seems this is alarming to me, but you know. I know there's a lot of problems in the world, and I just thought maybe you guys might have some feedback as well.
We had a farmer here a couple of weeks ago talk about how they pinpoint their fertilizers and regulate it themselves. Is that improving some of these statistics? Or?
One thing, he's probably talking about nitrogen use efficiency. NUE is a measure that has improved through the use of like GPS on tractors and stuff like that for precision agriculture. So being more effective at, from the farmer's perspective of getting the most out of the pound of nitrogen put on. But that's been more than offset by the growth in the use of fertilizer and the growth in corn acre and the growth in bushels per acre grown has really intensified, and so that's a true measure, but it's not.
So if they
It's
weren't
not.
doing
It's
that,
not.
it'd be even huge, larger.
If they were trying to, their costs would be higher for nitrogen fertilizer. Yeah.
Isn't the elephant in the room the problem that how do you get literally tens of thousands of agricultural producers to voluntarily limit the kind of flow that needs to be changed without having some kind of uniform regulatory scheme? I mean, is it possible? Can you get cooperation of 150,000 independent producers?
Well, I have looked at programs across the country, and I haven't seen one that works. There are some states that have adopted some types of regulatory or expected best management practices or performance standards for agriculture. They're sort of few and far between, and they tend to not be enforced. So there isn't really a good system, in my opinion, out there now in the U.S. There are some more promising things going on in the Netherlands and in parts of Europe, but
I mean, at the end of the day, isn't food going to cost us more if we're not going to pollute water?
I think it's possible, but much of what we're seeing problems from is not food for humans. It's food for your cars, and to be shipped out and to be fed to animals to fatten them up. So I think that I don't think that we have to have the system that we have now. I don't think we have to have the impacts to water quality that we have externalized now, but it's going to take a change in the way we do things, and it's going to take. We have some very powerful lobbies that want the status quo to remain. So I think that's why I say we have some societal choices to make. So.
What's going on legislatively in Minnesota, and then following up on that, will the change in the majority in the House and the Senate have an impact on what's going on?
The legislature, and only the legislature, appropriates money, right? So they are the ones that actually spend the legacy dollars and anything else that goes to environmental spending. So that obviously that's going on pretty much all the time. This is going to be a budget year, this session coming up, so there'll be a lot of work around that. In terms of policies that are at the level to deal with this scale of change that's needed for water quality, it's not ready. It's just not ready, and that's independent of which party controls the House. The Minnesota House went from Democrat to Republican. Actually, the Republican one of the lead Republicans on water, is likely to have the chair, either the chairmanship of the Ag Committee or of the Legacy Committee that spends these dollars, and that's Paul Torkelson from Watonwan County, and he's a pretty good guy. When the Republicans had the House after the 2010 election, he was in a similar position of power. So I don't expect anything to happen on the federal level.
One more question?
Thank you, Chris.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.